If you're anything like me, you're a fan of the show Yellowstone. But as somebody that's lived in Montana my entire life, there's several things that stand out to me that they just simply get wrong about living in Montana. The first thing is just the volume of violence. The murder rate here is actually fairly low, and you're not going to find a whole lot of shootings happening in Montana. Whereas if you watch Yellowstone, it seems like somebody's getting shot every day. And it's just not accurate. It doesn't reflect the actual lifestyle in Montana and the low crime rates that are here in our state. Now, obviously, this makes for better television. Everybody likes violence and gore and all of that fun stuff, but it's just not very realistic when you actually think about how often it's happening compared to the population of these areas. Another thing the show gets wrong about living in Montana is just the general geography of the state. The show makes Montana feel really small, and that's just not the case. Montana is a very large state, and it's really spread out. So we have an unrealistic situation where things feel close to each other, and people are instantly from one area of the state to another, and it's just not very realistic. There's, a lot of time needed to go from Paradise Valley to Bozeman. It's, about an hour away. It's not something that's just a quick trip to the store. It's a pretty significant commute, but it makes it feel like it's just right there. Another thing that they get wrong about the geography is later in the show, Casey moves to the Pryor Mountains with his family. That's a significant distance. It's about 3 hours. It's 186 miles from Bozeman to the Pryor Mountains, and depending on exactly where he's at. But they make it feel like it's just over there a little bit. And there's times in the show where, Casey's in the Pryor Mountains and he gets called up and he just shows up in Bozeman. And it's just not very realistic. That would be like driving from Seattle to Portland. One of the major plot lines throughout the show is the proximity of the Broken Rock Indian Reservation to Paradise Valley and Bozeman. So there's obviously a big turf war going on, and it's a big part of the show. The problem is it's completely made up. Not only is the Broken Rock Reservation not a real reservation, there's not an Indian reservation in southwest Montana. There's nothing by Bozeman that would even create the possibility of this dynamic. It just simply doesn't exist. The creators of the show just made it up. There are Indian reservations in Montana, but they're hours away. You have the Crow Reservation over by Billings, and you have the Flathead Reservation over up by Missoula going up towards Flathead Lake. And they're hours away from here. So there's not a dynamic between southwest Montana and Bozeman to these reservations. Obviously, without the reservation being near Bozeman, there's not going to be an Indian casino either. The closest Indian casino would actually be up north of Missoula. So it's the Gray Wolf Peak Casino. And, that's over 3 hours away from Bozeman. So you're not going to have a big Indian casino having influence trying to grab land in Paradise Valley. It's just not a dynamic that's going to exist. So that's something in the show that just isn't very realistic. Also in Montana, just casinos in general. We have a lot of little casinos that are attached to gas station liquor stores and stuff like that, where you have stuff, like video poker and Keno and stuff like that, but you don't have like the big casinos here in the state of Montana. It's just not something that we have with our gambling laws. Obviously, I think that could be different on an Indian reservation, but in general, that's just not the scene in Montana. So there's the big one in Missoula, but that's about it. Moving on, one of the biggest things I've noticed about watching the show Yellowstone, it's always perfect weather, blue skies, and awesome. And that is fairly realistic for a part of the year. We have an awesome spring and summer and a little bit of a fall, and the weather is awesome. We're called the Big Sky State for a reason. We have big blue skies. It's beautiful out. We don't get a ton of rain, so that part's realistic. But from October through April, you're going to have snow on the ground. It's going to be muddy. It's going to be cold. It's going to be wet. It's going to be snowing. And that's part of living in Montana that the show just simply ignores. They paint this picture that it's always nice here, but they don't have the realities of living in Montana. They don't have, the big snowfall and those challenges, especially with ranch life of doing winter in Montana. Several times throughout all the seasons of the show, they make a reference to taking somebody to the train station. And what this really is they're going to take them out and kill them and dump their body. So if you tell somebody, I'm going to take you to the train station, they're going to have red flags going off right away because that's not a real thing. So I'm assuming that this is supposed to be down south of Paradise Valley towards Yellowstone National Park. So in the show, they cross the Wyoming border, and that's where the train station is, where they, kill the guy and dump the body. That's not a rural area like they portray it to be. You're talking about Yellowstone National Park, the first national park in the United States. This is a major tourist hub. And Montana and Wyoming are full of outdoor activities. You're gonna have a lot of people in that area. It's not gonna be this, remote place that's good for hiding bodies that nobody's gonna find them. No, like people fish right there. Like in the show, there's the big drop off on the side of the road. That's gonna be going down to a river. There's gonna be people floating that river and fishing that river and hiking, and it's just not a very realistic situation as a whole. Before we get into what else they got wrong about living in Montana, I just want to highlight this microphone. Let me know in the comments if it sounds good. I'm testing it on this video. We actually have a bunch of live streams coming up, so make sure you subscribe and watch those live streams. It's a way to interact with me and get your questions answered about what it's like to live in Montana and anything you want to talk about, from real estate to Bozeman to Montana in general. So keep an eye out for those and let me know if you like how this microphone sounds. Obviously, the show takes place on a cattle ranch, and in the show they claim that it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island. They're claiming that this is about an 800,000 acre plus ranch. That's massive. However, in the show, it's fairly small operation. They have a handful of people working there, and they take care of their business, and they have a little bit of cattle going on, and they have some horses going on. It's just not realistic for the magnitude of ranch that they're claiming. So to put this in comparison, the King Ranch down in Texas is 825,000 acres, and they have a crew of over 500 people. It's a massive corporation. It's not something where you have a ranch family and they have a few hired hands. They're not going to pull somebody from the prison and be like, hey, we need an extra person. No, it's a massive operation. Think of like any business with 500 people, they're going to be constantly hiring. You're going to have HR. You're going to have, all sorts of infrastructure around that. It's not going to be you have a little bit of a bunkhouse where 6 people live and they take care of the ranch. It's just too massive. One thing to know is that the actual ranch they're filming isn't in Bozeman. So they use the Chief Joseph Ranch for a lot of their filming, and that's up in Darby, Montana, which is going to be closer to Missoula. And it's several hours away from Bozeman. But, that's where they film. It's just a production thing, which is fine. But for the first 3 seasons of the show, they actually did most of their filming down in Utah. And it's part of the Rocky Mountains, and it's going to be similar to Bozeman and Montana, but it's just not Montana. They were filming in Utah. Season 4, they moved production up to our area. They're actually filming outside of Missoula. They have some framing shots and stuff like that in Bozeman. There's a lot of Bozeman shots that aren't actually Bozeman. So one thing that will give it away, anytime you see angled parking in downtown Bozeman, that's not in Bozeman. There's no angled parking in downtown Bozeman. So there's stuff like that that's just not realistic. It's getting better now that they have moved production to primarily in Montana. But it's just one thing that you should know as you watch the show, that the first 3 seasons, you're looking at Utah. So there's a lot of things that Yellowstone gets wrong about living in Montana, but they get a lot of it right too. So go ahead and hit subscribe, because we have another video coming out that's everything that Yellowstone gets right about living in Montana. You're not going to want to miss that one, so hit subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.